Welcome to the Tyler's Place podcast, a podcast by Freemasons for Freemasons, brought to you by the Supreme Council of the Scottish Rite, Southern Jurisdiction. I'm Maynard Edwards, 33rd degree, coming to you from the House of the Temple in Washington, D.C. On our last episode, we talked to Brother Michael Arce from the Craftsman Online podcast. I really hope you checked out their show. It's a great show, a lot of fun to listen to each week, so check that out. They're linked in the description of this podcast. But during that episode, I mentioned that we were going to be connecting with a lot more Masonic podcasters. And on this episode, this one is a podcast that's really special to me. Brother Hank Griffin is a very good friend, and he's the creator of the You've Been Hanked podcast, which is possibly my favorite name for any podcast ever. You've Been Hanked. And it's entirely unique in the world of Masonic podcasting. He talks about Freemasonry and family and faith, and it's not done in just these discussion type formats like this podcast. It's done through these wonderfully told stories that are just so evocative that it will take you to a place in your mind that is very special. It's a story, and Brother Hank really takes you on a journey. He's the Grand Chaplain of Maryland. He's become a great friend, as I said, and I want to play you an excerpt from one of his recent episodes just so you can experience what You've Been Hanked is like.
Granddad Bob and Granny Alice were married a long time, decades, a lifetime. They loved each other. They must have to stay together because they didn't really seem to like each other very much. Don't get me wrong, they made it work, and I really admire them for it. Frankly, a whole lot of people could learn from their example. It wasn't easy for them. During the day, they occupied themselves with very different tasks. Sometimes they shared morning or midday meals, though often they didn't. If company was over, they usually took supper together. When the day's labor were finished, she relaxed in the bedroom to read or watch television. He relaxed in the front room to do the same. Each had their own domains. His was his shop, where he welded, did other kinds of work, and worked on hobbies that he enjoyed. Hers was the house, particularly the kitchen, and the yard where she liked to garden. The front room was common ground. Both loved horses and riding, so the barn was also common ground. There wasn't a lot of other common ground.
That's an excerpt from the You've Been Hanked podcast created by Brother Hank Griffin. He's the Grand Chaplain of Maryland. And as you can hear, his approach to Masonic podcasting is very personal, very unique. I sat down with Hank a few weeks ago at his home lodge in Pentelpha Lodge, number 194 in Germantown, Maryland. And we started talking about podcasting and family and Freemasonry and all those things. And a lot of his stories seem to take place in the little town of beautiful East Texas. So I asked Hank, what's beautiful East Texas really like?
I'm from beautiful East Texas, and sometimes people say, "Oh, Hank, where is beautiful?" And beautiful is about 80 miles east of Dallas, but it's not really named beautiful. That's sort of a region. I thought, well, if I'm going to tell stories, am I going to talk about this little town or this little community or this? No, it's a region that I like to refer to as beautiful, and some of my most beautiful memories are of that region and the people that lived there and the time that I spent there, which was the first half of my life. All my first loves were there. All the old people that I love are there. My first really good, extraordinary dog came from beautiful. It's a wonderful place. It's a place, it's a plane of existence, a spiritual plane, a state of excitement, sometimes desire, and the most wonderful memories. Yeah, I'm from beautiful. I've been here for about 20 years. My dearest love is a native of this area. When we met online, it wasn't really a thing back then, and we realized that it was the real thing and that one of us was going to have to move, and we flipped a coin and I lost. So here I am. I'm not complaining. I want everything else, but yeah, there you go.
And so spent your life in Texas. Now, what did you do for a living? So growing up, I don't want to ruin too many of your stories and have you spill them all here because you make me miss that part of the country, and I'm not even from there. But what did you do for a living and throughout your life?
When I began my professional life as a police officer, I thought, what am I going to do that I can make a difference in people's lives, hopefully help some people, maybe even save a baby or two before it's all said and done. And I realized that policing was probably the best way for me to go about that. I was not a police officer for as long as I would like to have been. Things happened, and I was not able to keep up with that kind of work. And I have done some writing and some editing, and in fact, I retired as an editor in the year 17 here in this area. But what I do these days, and what I really love doing, is I'm involved with my family and my faith and my fraternity. I've been a Mason for, by Texas reckoning, 24 years. By Maryland reckoning, 23. In Texas, when you're an entered apprentice, you're a Mason. In Maryland, it's different, and that's fine. I love Maryland Masonry. That is an observation of the way things are, but not a criticism. And raising my family. You know, I have one final great work left, and it's to raise my young son. He's 10. I have a daughter who's 27 and 3 beautiful grandbabies and a 10-year-old boy, and sure would like to raise him to adulthood and see him get his start in life. And along the way, if I can do some good in the world and maybe inspire some people to also want to do some good in the world, then that's gravy. That's gravy on an otherwise beautiful chicken fried steak.
Now you know why I love this guy. Your entire manner of speaking, it is an art form unto itself that I truly love that form. I'm a huge fan, and if folks who are watching or listening, you have to know who Garrison Keillor is, and you remind me a little of the Masonic Garrison Keillor and your approach to things. But I have to know what first brought you to that door. Those 3 distinct knocks all Masons must make. What brought you to that door? Was this a family? Would this run in your family, or something else entirely?
I wish it did run in my family. It does not. When I was a kid, every day, I rode bus 2 back and forth to school. I'd get on the bus at 5 o'clock in the morning. I'd get off the bus at about 5:30 in the afternoon. 2 hours, 52 miles one way on the oil and dirt roads of beautiful East Texas. And just before I'd arrive at school each day, I'd pass a pitiful little rundown shack of a building. It couldn't have been more than about, if it was 12 by 16, that might be bigger than it really was. At some point in the distant past, it might have been painted yellow. Maybe. And the only thing that was pretty on that building was on the side there was a black square and compass that they really did go to some effort to make. They didn't maintain anything else, but they maintained that square and compass. That was the local Masonic Lodge. And it was right on the edge of the school property. The last thing that I saw before I got to school every day was that lodge. And the first thing that I saw every day as I was leaving school was that lodge. Now, from the time I was 7 until I was old enough not to have to ride the bus anymore, that was a enduring part of my day. And I remember passing, I'd look at, what is that? What is, and I didn't know. But I knew that emblem, even though I didn't know what it was, I didn't know what it was called, I knew that it was important, it was significant. And when I got old enough to start paying attention, I noticed that that emblem was on the rings of some men. And without exception, anytime I was able to recognize that emblem was on somebody's, either their finger or maybe they had a special shirt or something on the back of their truck, that was a good man. Those men were inevitably and without exception, in my experience, those were good men. And that had my attention. That had my budding attention of a young man who was trying to put things in life together. And one day I recognized that my good friend, Mr. Blanton, he was a World War II veteran. I talk a lot about my Uncle Carl in my podcast, and he was a contemporary of my Uncle Carl. Mr. Blanton lived down the road in a house that was built back in the 1850s, and I remember one day he was working on his barbed wire fence. I was driving down the road, and I didn't have anything else to do, and I pulled over. "Hello, Mr. Blanton." He waved at me, and I walked over. "Can I help you with your fence?" And he sort of laughed at me, but he let me. And I asked him, "What is that ring?" That's a Masonic emblem. It's called Square and Compass. "Why are you asking?" He said, "I'd just like to know more about it." And he talked to me a little bit about it. And I said, "Well, how do you become a Mason?" He said, "Well, if you want to be a Mason, you have to ask a Mason." He said, "Nobody's ever going to invite you. If you want to be one, you need to ask one." And I said, "And you're one?" He said, "Yes." I said, "I'm asking." He said, "What are you asking?" He had a sense of humor. It was kind of wry. I said, "Mr. Blaine, I'm asking, can I be a Mason?" He said, "Well, I don't know." And we went back to work. And he didn't really talk about it anymore. And I didn't understand why. And I was a little bit embarrassed. Mm-hmm. And at the end, I thought, surely he was going to say something more. He didn't say anything more. And I thought, what in the world? Well, I shook his hand, and I got back in my car. We worked for some hours on that fence, and that sucker never said anything more about it. And I went on my way, and I saw him again a few weeks later. And again, I asked him about it, and he just sort of smiled, and he nodded, and he didn't say much. This went on for nearly a year. He was an old kind of Mason.
Sure.
One day,
because nowadays they'd give you,
oh
you
my
wouldn't get
God.
the word out of your mouth before they had a petition in your hand.
No, I was driving down the dirt road in front of his house one time, and I was driving sort of slow, and he was on his porch, and he saw me, and he waved, hey, and he called out like you do. I pulled in. He said, come, I want to show you something. And we walked around to his backyard. Now, in beautiful East Texas, I had never seen a pomegranate tree before. I don't know that at that point in my life I'd ever actually seen a pomegranate. I didn't know what that was. And we started to go out to his pasture, and I looked around. I was a little nervous because when I was a kid, I got in a tangle with this bull one time, and I didn't want to get in another one. He had a mean old bull. And I realized we was about to cross that fence, and I said, Mr. Bland, what are we doing? And he started laughing at me. He said, don't worry, the bull's in the other pasture. You'll be fine. And we crossed the fence, and we started walking towards this tree, and it was probably about 14 feet tall and not a great big tree. He said, do you recognize that? Well, yeah, it's a tree. He said, don't be that way. Do you recognize what the tree is? No, sir, I don't know what it is. And we got closer, and I realized it had red globes hanging on it, and I thought, I know, that's one I don't know. And he picked one of those pomegranates for me, and he handed it to me, and he picked one for him, and he handed it to me, and he showed me how to open it up, and I thought, oh, that's beautiful, full of... Mm-hmm. And we began to talk about just life in general, and I'm wondering, what are we doing here? And finally he said, a year ago you asked me about Masonry. You said you wanted to become a Mason. He said, do you still want to be a Mason? I said, yeah, Mr. Bland, I want to be a Mason, but I hadn't talked to you in about a while because I didn't think that you really wanted me to. And he said, well, I wasn't sure, and I need to be sure before I recommend the fraternity that I love, that I recommend somebody to join it, because I don't need somebody that I join in it, somebody that I've recommended to join it, to come in and make a spectacle of themselves and embarrass me or detract from our brotherhood. And before that conversation was over, he reached into his jacket pocket and he pulled out the most beautiful, heavy bond, light blue, folded up piece of paper. He unfolded it, and it had a picture of the Grand Lodge of Texas on it. That's where I got my start. The Grand Lodge of Texas, and handed it to me, and it was so beautiful. I wish I still had it. He said, you need to get 7 signatures, and you need 7 references, and here is a list of names of people that I think you may know that you might want to ask about this. And I said, I noticed you didn't sign it. He said, you hadn't asked.
He was an old school Mason.
He was an old school Mason, but he was one of the best men that I've ever known, and I wanted to be like him, and that's what brought me to Masonry.
That style of telling the story is what makes your podcast so unique and so special. So what made you decide you wanted to take all these wonderful tales that you have and commit them to this new media?
I think that this is a medium that does a few things. One, as I record these things and I save them in an electronic format, it will be a legacy for my children. They will have the stories that I'm the only person on earth that even knows these stories. And a lot of the stories that I have are a legacy to me from my Uncle Carl, from my grandfathers, from my grandmothers, from my parents. And they're stories that nobody else knows or nobody else understands quite the way that I do. And I want my children to have these things and have that perspective. But not only that, it also gives me an opportunity to share with good men and good women things that maybe they will never otherwise encounter in quite the same way. I know that the way that I express myself, which incidentally is sort of like falling in a ditch, you just do it. Mm-hmm. It's not special as I'm doing it any more than falling in a ditch is. Honestly, I spend as much time trying to get out of that ditch as anything else. But I want to have an opportunity to affect the world for better. Michael Carl always said, Hank, if you want a neighbor, you have to be a neighbor. And I would amend that very slightly. If you really want a good brother, you have to be a good brother. If you want your community to be the best it can be, you need to be the best you can be in affecting it. And this is just one of the ways that it's a small way, it's a simple way, but this is one of the ways that I'm able to do that, or at least I hope so.
The unique thing about your podcast, aside from the storytelling and the personal element, is it's not history of high degree masonry or anything of the sort. It's very simple Blue Lodge type of lessons of how is this man living these lessons every single day, and where do those lessons fit in the grander scheme in your life? And I think that's a lot more unique than you give yourself credit for. So was there, in terms of storytelling, is there someone who influences you that you were doing that? I mean, this feels a lot like your journal, and I love that element. That's not, I hope that doesn't sound like I'm dismissing what you're doing. It feels so deeply personal. That's what made me love it instantly.
Well, there's two things that I know for sure. Number one, now I'm not talking in the micro, but in the cosmic scheme of things, I'm nobody and I'm nothing. I have an opportunity to walk in a company of giants, but I'm a dwarf walking in the company of giants. And so for me to ever suppose that I should take it on myself to tell you how you should do something, that doesn't enter my mind. Frankly, if anything else, I wouldn't mind hearing some good counsel whispered in my own ear to help me get this other thing that I maybe need some help with right. As far as influences, there's a few. First and foremost, I know that I've mentioned my Uncle Carl before. He's one of, like my dad and my granddad Bob and my mom, he's a pillar upon which I've built the foundation of my manhood. His personal example in everything, almost, is worthy of emulation. And I aspire to emulate it. And he never said the words, Hank, I'm a storyteller. He just told stories, and they were the most wonderful stories. He would talk about how he was originally from Oklahoma. And I'm a 6th or 7th generation Texan. That was not the case for him. They came from Oklahoma. The Dust Bowl finally ran them out in the Great Depression. And one of the stories that I love, and I do talk about this on my podcast in the episode, I think I called it Escaping the Dust Bowl or something like that, was how he came to Texas. And he would tell this wonderful story about how the Dust Bowl was encroaching and his father would work their cotton farm. They farmed cotton, and it was not a big farm. They'd get 2 bales a year, and all the kids and him would work it. They never hired anybody. Never had electricity, never had any running water. They had a spring that they had buried a barrel into the ground, and neighbors would come from all over and this cold, wonderful, clean water and get this water. And eventually the Dust Bowl just ran them out, and they had to get out, and his brother Jim died. And it was just this awful, in a way, story, but also the way that he told it, you had much less sense of the tragedy of it and much more sense the beautiful evolution of our family's history in a way that was in living color, just by virtue of the way he told it. And it wasn't just that story, all kinds of stories. He was painfully shy. He did not encourage anybody to come to his home except for my brothers and I and my mother, who he sort of took under his wing when she was married to his nephew, and he loved us boys, and he sort of took her under her wing as a way to be closer to us boys. But he didn't really encourage anybody because he was just so shy. But these stories, these wonderful, that nobody knows. And I don't want these stories to be lost. You mentioned Garrison Keillor. I love the way that Garrison Keillor tells stories. There's things about Garrison Keillor that I don't want to emulate, but his manner of telling stories, I'm pretty sure that I will never be able to match that caliber of storytelling, and I'm okay with that because I'm not Garrison Keillor. I'm Hank. But I used to listen to the Prairie Home Companion anytime I could dial in the college radio station that was not too far from my house. Anytime I could dial that in at midnight, it'd come on at midnight, or it'd come on at 10 o'clock in the morning on Saturday. And I like to listen to the Prairie Home Companion. I like to listen to Paul Harvey. Paul Harvey would come on, and he would tell these wonderful stories. And you know what the news is. Now you'll hear the rest of the story, and then he'd end it, good day, and oh my gosh, everything in between that. I don't know who Cole Porter is before I heard Paul Harvey talk about Cole Porter. But when I heard him talk about, I wanted to know, who is Cole Porter? And that's true for so much else. And one of the things that I loved about Paul Harvey, I'm a Latter-day Saint, and in those days in that part of the world, we weren't always real popular, but Paul Harvey would occasionally talk about the Latter-day Saints, and it was never in a negative way or a condescending way. And I thought, oh man, this is one that would encourage me to listen to him more. Yeah, there's several influences there when it comes to storytelling, but those maybe are three of the biggest ones.
I want to talk a little bit about your Masonic career, if we could, because you're the Grand Chaplain, and I think and this is no slight to any men who've come before you, but you do such a fantastic job in that role, and you've come to my rescue on more than one occasion. I wonder what made you get in that line to become an officer in the Masonic Lodge. Last year, we're recording this in 2023. Last year, was that your first year in the East?
I served in 2022. That was my first year in the East.
And it was here, and we're in your home lodge in Pentalpha Lodge.
This is Pentalpha Lodge, number 194 in beautiful Germantown, Maryland. And I'm going to tell you, this is my favorite lodge in all of God's beautiful creation. I love
it's a beautiful lodge.
This lodge. Now, there's 103 wonderful lodges in Maryland. I don't detract from any of those, but this one's my favorite. And there's no bones about it. It is. I came, I think it was the year 17 or 18. I don't remember for sure. I'd been a Mason since 99. And I joined the Scottish Rite in Maryland in 2006. I moved here in 2004. I told you we flipped a coin to see who would move, and I lost. That's not really what happened. What really happened is my father-in-law, my bride was going to move to Texas, and she had agreed to do that, and we eloped to Texas. And then on the morning of our wedding, she said, listen, Hank, my dad's 78, and, I'm the youngest, and I'm there looking after him, making sure he's okay, and I'm worried that if I move down here, he's going to be alone. He's not going to have anybody looking in on him, and, my mom passed away in 2000. I'm worried. And she started crying. What do you do? If you love your wife, you say, okay, we're going to do the right thing.
That's what you do.
Packed my bags, and it was hard. But I packed my bags and I moved up here. And one of the ways she sold me on this is going to sound terrible. I don't mean for it to. She said, he's 78. He's really only planning to live to about, 83. He's probably only going to live for another 2 or 3 years, and then we'll move back to Texas. Yeah, okay, that sounds reasonable. That sucker lived for 12 more years. 12 more.
Bless his heart.
For real, he's one of the best men I've ever known. I'm going to talk about him in my podcast one day. Jerry saw 1/3 of this nation's history with his own eyes. That man shook not one but two hands of living Civil War veterans when he was 5 years old. He saw World War II from his time in the South Pacific Theater and on the front lines in Italy fighting the Nazis and the fascists.
Wow.
Jerry's an extraordinary human being. And so for me to say that sucker lived for 12 more, thank goodness he did.
Sure. But obviously.
But I was not planning for him to. No.
Glad it went the way it did.
Yes.
God's plan is better.
God's plan is better. And of course, it really is, because in that 12 years, we had a lot of time to invest ourselves here, and you can't just get up and move once you've done that. You got to let your crops come to fruition, and we're still waiting on that time, so we may be here forever. Who knows? In the end, it's been very good. I joined Scottish Rite Masonry in Baltimore in the year 6, but I didn't do anything else. And then one day I woke up and I realized, what are you doing? You need community. I have church community, that's a good thing, but you need more than that. And I got to look and I thought, I want to be a Knight Templar. Well, where did the Knights Templar meet? And that's here at Pentalpha. And I came and I knocked on the door, and there was two gentlemen, John Austin and Chris Brown.
Dear friend John.
Yes, two good men, and both of whom have become my very dear friends. I love these men. were like my own brothers, and they are my own brothers, but they're my personal friends in addition to that. And I would come to the dinners and the fellowship opportunities and get to know them, and as a part of that, but naturally, because we're in Pentalpha Lodge, I'm meeting a lot of the brethren from here, and I fell in with these guys, and I realized I like this community, and I affiliated. And I served as the, look at me pointing like, I served as the senior deacon, and then I served as the junior warden, at the time, our worshipful master, James Kinnear, who was serving his third term, not consecutive, but his third term, he came to me and said, listen, Brother Hank, we're going to need somebody to serve in the East next year who isn't me. And do you think it could be you? And I thought, I don't know. And this was the end of March in 19. And he said, you're a little bit behind already. He said, if you don't have something in May in the way of having certified, you're going to be in trouble.
And we should say for folks listening and watching that in Maryland, the worshipful master has to pass an exemplification test of all 3 degrees. And it's pretty hefty. You've got to do all the degree work and the entire lecture, first, second, and third from memory, no books, none of that stuff. And you have to do that in a lodge setting. So you have to prove you can get 6 guys who will go in with you to do the degree work and that you can, herd all those cats and do all that memory work. So it's a significant task to exemplify.
It really is. And I was so fortunate. 2 of my brothers here, Brother Carl and Brother Ken, started meeting with me every Thursday, off Thursday. We meet on Thursdays, every off Thursday. And were so helpful to me. And then I met John Breck, who's master over at Silver Spring, and we started working together and built a real friendship just on this experience of trying to certify for the East. And together, we memorized 30,000 words and we certified, and we did it in 7 months. And I'm not boasting, that's the way that it happened. And I was able to serve. And then in the course of 2022, we were really active, extremely active, and I hope you don't think I'm boasting, but we won the Grand Master's Award. And I'm so proud of having won the Grand Master's Award. Grand Master Mills was very kind in presenting that. It was so meaningful to me to have that happen. And then Deputy Grand Master Spicer very kindly reached out to me a day or 2 after his election. I was driving down actually Promise was driving to my bride's name is Promise. She was driving and I was riding with her, and I got a call from Brother Spicer, and he said, would you be willing to serve as my grand chaplain? And yes, sir, and thank you very much. I would like that. And then I got off the phone, I looked at Promise, and I thought, I don't know that I'm the right man for this. And I'm pretty sure that I'm not qualified for this, but my Uncle Carl told me many times, and my dad reiterated many times, that when somebody asks you to provide service, you provide that service, and you do the best that you can. And if I'm succeeding, good, and if I'm failing, then that's Brother Spicer's fault for choosing poorly.
Well, I don't think he chose poorly at all. And I'm glad you sort of beat me to my next question, which is that you are obviously a man of deep faith. You mentioned that you're a Latter-day Saint. And, I say this as a compliment, not as a criticism. You wear your faith on your sleeve, and that is to your credit. And I can see that in so many things that you do, and you definitely have brought that to the office of the Grand Chaplain. So you sort of beat me to the punch of how you ended up being Grand Chaplain, but what does that role mean to you? What does that mantle mean to you? Because you are doing it a little differently than a lot of other folks that have done that in recent memory. And that's not a criticism of them, but it's a credit to you and your approach just being unique to Hank.
Remember what I said about the way that I talk is sort of like falling into a ditch, and it's just sort of the way things are. That I don't have any subtlety. I don't have a lot of nuance. I'm just who I am. And if I could just take a moment and credit some good men who have served before me. Brother Dave Sandy was my immediate predecessor.
Human.
He's so kind to me and so good. I mentioned earlier on Facebook, expressed that I wanted to take my son to do some more fishing. We'd done a little fishing, but I want to do some more. And he immediately offered to take me and be a guide in certain places. That man is a good man.
Indeed.
Brother Ulmer, who preceded me.
Bless his heart, rest his soul.
Rest in peace. Any time that somebody comes to me and they talk about men who were some of the most able men that our Grand Lodge has seen serving in this role, his name is right at the tip of their tongue and on their lips. Those two are not the only two, but they are two that I want to be sure that we remember. And of course, I'm surrounded by some of the best assistants you could ever actually. There's Rabbi Randy Schock and Brother Earl Benson and Brother Andy Crowley. I'm so fortunate to have an infrastructure of experience and willingness to serve. And as for me and the way that I take this role, I don't know how much you or your listeners know about Latter-day Saints, but one of the things that people, I think, associate with us is a desire to proselytize. Masonry is not that place. We are a wonderfully pluralistic society of friends and brothers, and I do not ever want that to change. I like it just like it is, and merely having the opportunity to serve in this vineyard from the prospect and standpoint of how can I bless you just as you are and work with you to make this world that we live in better means the world to me. When people are in a little bit of a fix, I think sometimes our default is, well, I'm going to remember you in my prayers, and that's important. And I do want to remember people in my prayers. But I also would like to be able to sit with you and laugh with you and cry with you and bless you and be blessed by you. And can I bring you a meal, and can we share a meal? And can I invest my time in you in a way that blesses you without overstepping? I desperately wanted to serve a mission when I was 18. My Uncle Carl, who I keep falling back to, developed Alzheimer's. He didn't have kids. He wasn't married. There wasn't anybody else to take care of him. And he asked me, he knew what was happening. He asked me, would I look after him and take care of him? I had sold all my worldly possessions to fund a mission. I'd gone down and interviewed with my bishop and my stake president. The go-ahead was in place. I was waiting on a mission call. And I realized that I could not go if he wasn't going to be okay, kind of like promising her dad. And so I didn't go, and I have not ever regretted that service to Uncle Carl, but I have regretted that lack of service to my faith community. And this gives me an opportunity, maybe not an exact opportunity, but an opportunity to serve the greater community in a way in a significant way, similar to that I would have done had I served that mission. And I'm getting a wonderful support from my faith. And in fact, there's a process that we've almost ended. They're about to provide an ecclesiastical endorsement for me to be set apart as a chaplain in the church and also as a missionary in the church, specifically to serve Maryland Masons, not to proselytize, not to convert, to serve and bless Maryland Masons. And that is in the first sentence of the memorandum that they sent to the bishop and stake president when they asked them to do those interviews. And I couldn't be more pleased. This opportunity has been a gift and a blessing to me. And if I don't do the best that I can to live it accordingly, then I'm failing everybody. And so I'm just doing my best.
Well, in speaking of that, one of the ways that Brother Hank, we were brothers for a long time because we were both Masons, but we didn't know each other until this year. I think I was a member of the Grand Line when you became master of this lodge, so I was here for that. But those things, there's 300 people in the room, and you'd be lucky if you get to say hi to your own mom in one of those things. And But we were at a quieter meeting earlier in the year of this year, and I was having a rough time, and I went to the Grand Chaplain, who I didn't know well at all, really, and asked him for a few prayers, and he was kind enough to bless me in that moment, and we had a good chat, and we've since become friends. Do you get a lot of that? Do you get a lot of guys come to you? It must get a little bit challenging, people like me weighing their burdens on you and saying, old brother here, having a tough time with this. I mean, does that get heavy on your heart?
No. I welcome these opportunities. If a chaplain cannot provide spiritual support to those who fall in the stewardship that is, well, then he don't need to be chaplain. And so I welcome those opportunities. No, it's not a burden or anything like it. In fact, I have people who come to me and regularly ask me, Brother Hank, I'm struggling with this, I'm struggling with that. Will you pray for me? Certainly I'll pray for you, but how is it that you would like for me to pray for you? What specifically is it and that opens conversations, that opens opportunities for relationship building, which is every bit as important. You want to intervene with the Almighty, or not intervene, but supplicate on behalf of with the Almighty. I believe that when you're in the service of your fellow being, you're only in the service of your God. And so faith is action. I'm not trying to get into a discussion about
please,
that. But
this is the place for it.
But faith, in my view of things, includes action. And when these opportunities come, I immediately want to know how I can bless you in tangible ways. I'm not talking about getting my checkbook out necessarily and writing a check, but how can I bless you in tangible ways in addition to those prayers? And there's no better venue for that than to make it clear in our meetings, in my writings, in our conversations that I want to do that. I'm trying to do that. I'm trying to make it clear that if I may be of service to you, I'd like to be of service to you. And as a consequence of that, I have good men like you who are coming to me saying, I'm struggling with something. And then we get to talk about what it is, and then we get to become friends like you and I have. Our brotherhood is sharpened and deepened and broadened. Our respective and mutual experiences as Masons is brought into sharper focus. And it is as much a blessing to me, perhaps more than it is to you, because I get so much back out of it. And I don't mean necessarily tangible things from me. I'm not talking about favors. I'm talking about blessings. No, it's not a burden at all, and I don't feel weighed down. I'm so grateful for this opportunity to serve. Some people think, well, I want to do this and I want to do that, and I don't have any aspirations necessarily other than I want to be a good neighbor. I want to be a good brother, and I've never found a better place, a better venue to be a good neighbor or a good brother than I have in Masonry, and specifically as being a chaplain. If anybody out there listening is thinking to themselves, where is the opportunity for me to do as much good in the world as I can possibly do? Sitting in that chaplain's chair and doing more than just offering that beautiful set of rote prayers, taking it further as far as you can take it. There may be no other place, even in certain ways, than the East, because in the East you have so many heavy burdens. You don't have that as chaplain. As chaplain, you just have an opportunity to do good in the world.
Is there a lesson from Masonry that you carry with you that you reflect back on? I mean, I think they all get us at some point in time. I think all of them hit us variously, but is there one that you connect with more than the others?
Yeah. There's two, and I'll tell you one and I'll allude to the other. The first one is Masonry takes men of every understanding, of every origin and circumstance and socioeconomic background, men of every faith, but you must have some degree of faith. And they bring them into this lodge, and lodges just like it all over the world. And it introduces them, and over a period of time and initiatory experience, it makes them brothers. We're not just friends. We're not just neighbors. Certainly we are those things, and those are important, but we are brother. You're no longer Mr. Your brother. And it makes friends of men who would otherwise never have met. The likelihood of you and I meeting is so remote as to be highly unlikely. The further likelihood that we would meet and then become friends the way that we have, astronomically low. And that's true for all my brothers in Masonry. Some of my very best friends in all the world are men that I have served with in these settings. Yeah, that lesson is first and foremost for me. And the second one is very simply the importance of going and visiting those who are struggling.
Brother Hank Griffin, he's such a good friend, just a wonderful, wonderful guy. And when you talk about the real deal, the guy who walks the walk of Freemasonry, you're talking about Hank Griffin 100%. He is the creator of the You've Been Hanked podcast and the Grand Chaplain of Maryland. You can find the You've Been Hanked podcast on Apple Podcasts. I've got it linked in the description of this episode of The Tyler's Place. I really, really hope you will subscribe to You've Been Hanked, because I know you are going to enjoy taking that journey with Hank and taking that trip to beautiful East Texas to learn how Hank is incorporating those Masonic lessons into his everyday life. It's really different, and it's really special, and I hope that you will subscribe. Meanwhile, that's going to wrap things up for this episode. I thank you so much for joining us here. I'm Maynard Edwards, 33rd degree, coming to you from the House of the Temple in Washington, D.C. Tyler's Place podcast is brought to you by the Supreme Council of the Scottish Rite Southern Jurisdiction. If you've got questions, comments, or ideas, you can always email us at podcast@scottishrite.org, and we'd be happy to answer your questions. Don't forget to check out our other podcast, the Scottish Rite Journal podcast, and please do check out the YouTube channel, and I hope you will subscribe. That will wrap it up, and I will catch you next time right here on the Tyler's Place.